Section 1.3, Clinical Studies. So as we continue through Chapter 1, a lot of terminology. We've already built up some good foundation of terms from Sections 1.1 and 1.2. We're going to continue that here, looking at some terms that are associated with what's called clinical studies. And overall, we're going to look at treatment groups and control groups. What do those terms mean? Determine whether or not a placebo should be used, and then look at if a study is blinded and if it is double-blinded. So we'll see what those terms mean in the context of statistics. So looking at treatment versus control first, these topics. So, just refreshing, we looked at different ways to select samples in the last section. And in this section, we're going to look at approaches to collecting data from those samples in order to conduct a study. There are two main types of studies that can be done. An observational study. So this is where data is collected from just observing what is happening. There's no treatment or activity being controlled in any way. This is the key aspect of an observational study. Observational studies are commonly conducted using surveys, though you can also collect data by just watching what is happening, such as observing the types of trees in a forest. Sometimes they'll have taste tests. Those would also be an observational study. Even though it seems like you might be controlling something, you're really not in any meaningful way. You're just putting out a couple of maybe sodas, and you're asking someone to select which they think is the best. You're not trying to control anything. There's no real treatments. You're just saying, hey, taste these sodas. So even though it seems like there's some structure to it, that would still technically be an observational study because you're just observing which one they felt was better. So kind of keep that in mind. You're not really affecting what's going on with it. Now, an experiment, this is an activity where the researcher controls some aspect of the study and then records what happens. So this is huge. Controlling some aspect of the study and then records what happens. So an example of this is giving a plant new fertilizer and then watching what happens to the plant. So if we were going to look at that soda study, where in the first one with the observational, you're just like, hey, which one do you think is best? In the second one, if you're doing an experiment, maybe you give them the first, one whole group gets the first soda and the other group doesn't get anything. And then you check their teeth after several months and see whose teeth have worn down, more. So that would be something where you're controlling an aspect. Or you take the group and you say, hey, we're going to give you these sodas first. We want you to describe how you're feeling with them. And then you give the group the second soda and you ask them to describe what they're feeling about those. And maybe measuring some things from one soda to the next to see what's happening. So you're controlling some aspect of it. You're not just letting people choose what they want and observing. So another example, giving a cancer patient a new medication, monitoring whether the medication stops the cancer from growing. So, that's definitely something where you're going to be in a controlled study, an experiment. There are many ways to do an experiment, but a clinical study is one of the more popular ways, so we'll look at the aspects of this. And in a clinical study, this is a method of collecting data for a sample and then comparing that to data collected for another sample, where one sample has been given some sort of treatment and the other sample has not been given the treatment or the control. So one sample is given something and the other sample is given something else or not given anything at all. So there are occasions where you can have two treatments and no control. In this case, you're trying to determine which treatment is better. So this would be like for that cancer example, you have a new medication, you're giving that to a bunch of patients, and then you give the old medication to a bunch of patients, and you look and see which one has a better rate of curing the cancer, making people better. So the focus of this class will be on terminology associated with clinical studies, and the first terms that we're going to look at are going to follow. So treatment group and control group. So we've heard those terms, treatment, control. What does it really mean? Well, the treatment group is the group of individuals who are given some sort of treatment. The word treatment here does not necessarily mean medical treatment. The treatment is the cause which may produce an effect that the researcher is interested in. So it could just be something where the treatment, if you're looking at maybe a new exercise routine, is it going to help people strengthen a certain muscle better? Well, in there, they're not getting medicine or anything. It's just, hey, we want you to lift this weight in a certain way, or maybe, do this in a certain way. And that would be the treatment. It's, all the people in that group are going to do this exercise in a certain way. And then the control group is just a group of individuals who are not given the treatment. They may be given some old treatment. Sometimes they'll not be given anything at all. And other times they may be given a placebo. And we'll see that a little bit later. So the control group might just be the people who don't exercise at all, or maybe they're exercising with an old technique. So treatments, they can be medicine and oftentimes are, but doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So an example here of treatment and control might be something where you're studying plant growth. Some plants get fertilizer. Some do not. Plants with the fertilizer are the treatment group. Plants without are the control group. So that's all there really is to it. If you're wanting to study the effect of something, then you're going to, have your treatment group. And again, it doesn't have to be medicine. It can be a lot of different things. In this case, the example here is just fertilizer. Say, hey, is fertilizer effective? Does it cause the plants to grow better? So it's just anything you're applying to it. So one thing before you get into placebo to consider in any study is the presence of something that may be causing the outcome beyond the treatment. And these are, what's called confounding variables. These are other possible causes that may produce the effect of interest rather than the treatment under study. And researchers minimize the effect of confounding variables by comparing the results from the treatment group versus the control group. So, for example, in that fertilizer example, maybe the plants with the fertilizer also just happen to be in the place in the yard where it gets the most sun and gets the most water. And you're like, this fertilizer is amazing. But then, you put the plants over in the other plot that gets no sun, gets no water, put the fertilizer in there, and it's like, oh, they're not really growing that good. I wonder why. So in that case, the confounding variables would be the amount of sunlight that they're getting and the amount of water that they're getting. So in a good experiment, what you're hoping, if you're trying to isolate the effects of one treatment, one part of your treatment, you want to make sure that every other variable is the same. So you would want to make sure that these plants are getting the same amount of sun, whether they're getting fertilizer or not fertilizer. You want to make sure they're getting the same amount of water. And then just adding the fertilizer to one, no fertilizer to the other, you're starting from more of a level playing field, and you can see oh yeah, the plants with fertilizer are going much better, and it's going to be a more honest assessment of the effect of that treatment. So confounding variables are why experiments are used instead of observational studies for determining cause and effect relationships. And it's because that control that can happen, where you can make sure that all these confounding variables, these things that might affect your outcome otherwise, are controlled and the same for each group that you're applying either your treatment to or your control to. Now, placebo, sometimes used on the control group in a study to mimic the treatment that the treatment group is receiving. The idea is that if a placebo is used, then people in the control group and in the treatment group will all think they're receiving the treatment. However, the control group is merely receiving something that looks like the treatment, but should have no effect on the outcome. It's usually what they'll call like a sugar pill. An example of placebo could be that sugar pill if the treatment is a drug in pill form. So, sometimes with these treatments, especially in drug studies, maybe you're just asking the person if they feel better. Well, if they're not getting anything, they're going to be like, no, I'm not feeling better. Of course I'm not feeling better. I haven't gotten anything. But if you give everybody in your study something to take, whether it's an active ingredient treatment or whether it's a sugar pill placebo control, they'll then be really looking, be giving more of an honest answer and like, no, this medicine you're giving me, it's not working. And then they look, the people giving the study will look and be like, oh yeah, well, we gave them placebo, so that's good. We shouldn't be hearing that something's working. But, that's the whole point of the placebo, is try and get more of a, especially if you're asking people about things, get more of an honest answer and, really isolate that, yes, the treatment is the reason that they're feeling better, and not just, sometimes people just feel better because they think they're taking something. It's called the placebo effect. It's like, oh, I'm taking this pill. I must be, oh yeah, I'm feeling great. And it's like, you're just eating sugar. Right. So, placebos should be given sometimes to, hope get honest answers back. So here, example 1, I want you to read through that. Go ahead and pause the video and see how you're doing on this little first one. Okay, so we're going to consider the following scenario and answer the questions that follow. So a researcher wants to determine if a new drug treatment is effective in curing a disease. In order to do this, she randomly selects 50 people who have the disease to be in her study. 25 of the participants are given a new drug, 25 are given a placebo. So which is the treatment group? Well, it's the group getting the new drug. They are the ones of interest. You want to know if there's some cause-effect relationship with the new drug and getting better. So the treatment is getting the new drug. The control, what you're comparing it to, are the people who aren't really getting the active ingredient drug. They're the group getting the placebo. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this video here and actually stop this video here. And I want you to maybe think about example 2, and we'll jump into that in part 2 of this section.